Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. And now will you please give a warm welcome to Stephanie Mehta.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed the concurrent sessions. I'm going to encourage people who are out in the hallway to come on in because we have a really wonderful close to the program planned for the next hour and a half or so. Yesterday we heard from Mark Andreessen, who was responsible for commercializing the browser. Well, with all due respect to Mark, his baby or his invention is really evolving in a different way, and in some ways one could argue that the browser itself has entered its sunset years. There's a new group of companies emerging that are bypassing browser-based web connections and really linking our interactions directly to the devices, and what this new wave of technology is enabling these companies to do is quite different from the browser, and more importantly is kind of allowing them to charge for things in a new and interesting way. To help us navigate this new environment, we have a great panel for you. Kevin Lynch is CTO and Senior Vice President, Experience and Technology Organization at Adobe. Aaron Patzer is founder of Mint.com, and Kevin Hamilton is the CEO for North America of iRex, which is a division of Philips. They'll be talking with Time's Josh Quittner. Josh is editor-at-large for Time, and he covers consumer technology. Please welcome Kevin Lynch, Aaron Patzer, Kevin Hamilton, and Josh Quittner.
Thanks, Stephanie. Welcome, gentlemen. It's great to be here. Thank you, Fortune. It's fun to be visiting with the Time Inc. relatives. This is a topic that I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm really excited to be able to put together this panel. And if you'll indulge me for a minute and let me frame it, to paraphrase one of my favorite writers, allow me to ovulate my turgid fantasy here. My fantasy is that starting with the iPod and then with the iPhone, what Apple did was taught us that it was okay to pay for content again. That if we have a really, really great device that makes the consumer experience way, 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 way better than using, say, a computer, people will actually pay for content. And as my fantasy goes, we've got the Kindle that showed, even in its sort of very primitive state, 500,000 people or more have been willing to pay for it. And then we've got all sorts of announcements of all sorts of companies that are coming out with new ranges of devices that will be linked wirelessly to stores. We just saw earlier this week, Plastic Logic cut a deal with AT&T and Barnes & Noble, and on and on and on. If these devices are out and popular, my thinking goes, my fantasy goes, then maybe there's a role for magazines and for print. And that's really what I wanted to talk about today. I thought first, though, we'd kind of go down the line, and I could sort of get a little, or give the audience a sense of who everybody is. And basically what I've got is, Kevin is from Adobe, and he's going to talk a little bit about the OS side of things. Aaron, of course, is from Mint, and he's going to talk a little bit about the apps world, the native apps world. And Kevin, too, or Kevin Hamilton, is from the device world. He builds a device called iRex. And why don't we start with you? You guys were a spin-out of Philips, right?
Yeah, that's right, Josh. We are a spin from Royal Philips Electronics. We're headquartered in Eindhoven, the Netherlands, right on the high-tech campus there in Eindhoven. And we spun out in 2005, and we're on our third generation e-paper device, selling primarily into the professional and business markets, and mostly in Western Europe.
And that device is roughly the size of the big Kindle?
We have two devices. We've got a 6-inch device, which is aimed at the leisure reading market. We've got a 10-inch device, which is roughly the size of the Kindle DX, which we've been selling for a little over a year now, again, mostly in Western Europe.
And like the Kindle, it uses an e-ink technology. It's reflective rather than emissive.
Yeah, you bet. They all use kind of the same e-ink substrate. It's electrophoretic bistable technology. When it's on, it's on. When it's off, it's off. Very low power consumption, highly readable, even in bright daylight. It paints the page, the power shuts off, so the battery life is measured in days and weeks, not hours. And so it's a medium that's very conducive to publishing, to any kind of print media. Think of it as electronic printed material.
And at this point, is there any wireless linkage to a store so I can download on the fly?
Yeah, so great question. Obviously, we're here in the North American market. We've got some wonderful product announcements that are imminent, but not today.
Okay. Now, Aaron, on the app side, on the Mint side, I read yesterday or the day before a BBC piece, maybe a little bit of hyperbole, but the writer quoted a guy who was an apps developer, and he said, native apps, as opposed to web-based apps, but native apps are going to be bigger than the internet, whatever that means, by 2020. Whatever that means. Yeah. But I think the thrust of it is very, very interesting. I mean, we've seen amazing success with the iPhone App Store, more than 50,000 apps. It's probably going to be 100,000 by the end of the year. You guys, Mint, first of all, is the category leader in personal finance.
We are, yeah.
And you have, how many different, how can I get Mint?
Right, so you can get it on the web. We have 1.3 million users on the web. So I think in terms of our active user base, we're about 3 or 4 times larger than Quicken Online, who would be the biggest competitor. We have 250,000 iPhone users. We have about 100,000 people who use the service through SMS. You can text in for your balances on short code MyMint. You can get it on My Yahoo. We've got an application there as well. So our goal is to be on as many platforms as possible. And there's a big difference between each of the platforms. On the web, people log in about twice a week. On the iPhone, they're logging in multiple times a day. For text message, they do it 2 or 3 times a week. And then email is a big channel for us as well. We send out your balances and what you spent your money on once a week, how your investments are doing, that sort of thing. And about 200,000 people use email as their primary way that they use Mint.
Okay, so let me just scroll back just a tiny bit. 250,000 iPhone users. Yep. When did the Mint app go up?
It went up in January.
In January.
And in fact, we got to that number fairly quickly.
And then it leveled off?
Yep.
Okay. And you say web users come about once a week, and there are far more of them.
Twice a week, but yeah.
Twice a week. And iPhone users come?
1.2 times a day on average.
What is it? Oh, yeah, okay. So way more use from a smaller group of people.
Yeah, I mean, people, still 90% of purchases are offline. So people, whenever they go to make a purchase, whenever they're having dinner with their friends, whenever they want to see if they can afford a new DVD or whatever, they'll check their balances on Mint, and we link up to 8,000 different banks. You can check your budgets, so it's convenient. You never have to go to an ATM or even go online to check your balances anymore.
Okay, so we'll come back because I want to hear your thoughts on the one platform versus the other. But Kevin number 2, Kevin Lynch, tell us a little bit about AIR. AIR is a runtime environment, and while many people will pretend to know what that means, I will play the dummy here, which is pretty easy, and say, what is a runtime?
Sure. Well, a runtime enables you to run applications, and the game right now, as I see it, is that operating systems have evolved over a long period of time, and computing is really a history of abstraction. You know, you abstract the computing machine, then you have operating system, then you have APIs and things like Windows and OS X. And the next level is really a cross-operating system runtime, enabling you to build an application once and having it run across Mac, Windows, Linux, smartphones, whatever things that you have. And that's what AIR is aiming to do. And today it does run across operating systems, and there's applications running on it. There's been over 250 million installs of AIR now, so a lot of people are using it on their computers. And a lot of great applications now are starting to come out on it, like New York Times did a reader application that runs outside the browser. You can install it in your computer. It looks like a native app. It's in your dock on OS X. And when you run it, you can read the full newspaper. Even when you're offline, you've got it with you. And it has the New York Times brand. And one of the things that they're finding about this is it's been downloaded over 100,000 times in the first month or 2 that it was out.
The New York Times app.
The New York Times reader application. And the time that people are spending in the application is averaging 39 minutes right now, which if you think about the experience on the web today, with the browser, you tend to leap between sites quite frequently. And it's kind of like this ADD experience, inside of the browser, whereas in an application where you don't have the URL bar and you are really, your focus and your thought is around the articles you're reading, it's having more engagement with that content and more connection.
And that's on what many would consider to be an inferior platform, namely the kind of lean forward, look at the computer, look at the laptop experience, as opposed to a little thing that you lean back and can adjust with your arms rather than your whole body, right? I mean, seriously, what happens when we get those sorts of devices and you can start running things that are readable on them?
Yes.
And one example I just wanted to say, just to make this a little bit more real, one of the most popular examples of an AIR application is TweetDeck,
Yes.
which I notice a lot of people are using out in the audience.
Cool.
And TweetDeck takes over your whole screen. There's no browser. There's nothing but TweetDeck loaded into your machine.
Yes, and you get notifications when new tweets come in. So it basically gets you back to the capabilities we used to expect from native applications on your computer that we kind of lost some of when we went to the web. There's a lot of great aspects of the web, but from an application perspective, it lost a lot of functionality, and we're able now to get that functionality back, but still build these applications using web technologies. TweetDeck is built with the same technologies that you can use inside the browser, but it's running as a standalone application. So that means more people can build these applications. The creativity can be greater. The number of people who can build them is much broader. And so you see a boom, in Twitter applications that are mostly built with these web technologies and running on AIR today because they're so easy to build now too.
Right. They're all built just in Flash.
Right,
It's
or
running Flash.
HTML.
Right. So how are we going to get from where we are today, which is an incredibly fragmented market? You've got at least a dozen device makers that are all in various stages of pushing out their new device. The drumbeat of Apple coming out with its tablet. It gets louder and louder and louder, and we assume that the 60,000 plus applications that are available for it, Mint and so forth, will be in some clever hack ported over to this larger screen device, and that this whole ecosystem is just going to explode pretty soon. How do you see this all playing out? I mean, you guys are still in the world of black and white, which is a very, very limited experience. Can you give us, can we talk a little bit about the roadmap to get from here to my nirvana where I continue to draw a paycheck?
Yeah, we want to make sure you draw that paycheck, Josh. Well, from a device manufacturer's perspective, and we announced about a month and a half ago that we have leapfrogged with some really innovative new science, color display. And so our roadmap for our product is currently today 16 grayscale black and white, but end of 2010, beginning of 2011, we expect to have a vibrant, full color, very, very rich color display technology that we think we actually can manufacture cheaper than we're manufacturing currently our black and white displays.
Why is that?
New science, new technology, not e-ink. And that was the technology press release that we did about a month and a half ago at the display conference in Texas.
And is this a reflective display, or is it?
Still electrophoretic, bistable technology, but using...
So in other words, you can't read it in bed in the dark.
You need direct reflective light to read it. And I think all these display technologies still will take some more maturity and some more time to be able to do video and to do flash and Java and some of the high definition things that an LCD display can do. But for the purpose-built device that we envision, which is a device that is perfect for reading, a color device that we think would be perfect for reading perishable content. We had an interesting contact with Ann Moore, your boss. And she said, look, when you get color, we're there. We'll be there. We'll do anything you want to do if you've got color displays. And we said, well, look, it's a matter of time. We have to crawl before we walk, before we run. But we fully believe that we can deliver flat panel, very thin, very inexpensive color displays that will be platforms to do all kinds of applications, including reading.
And will this be able to do full color video as well, or is it going to, because it's bistable, it won't do video?
I think video is on the roadmap, but it's a ways out. I mean, there's a lot of issues on power management. There's issues on refresh rates and just processor rates. So I think the short answer is, for the time being, we're looking at static content that we can display on a display piece.
Aaron, what about, from your perspective, you're pretty agnostic about this whole thing, right? I mean, you're happy to serve users in any way that they come. You don't see any limitations to the browser.
I don't see any limitations to the browser. I think that we'll be on as many platforms as are useful to our users. But I guess the deeper and more provocative question here is, I feel like the premise for the panel is, if I might suppose what your motivations are.
Suppose away.
Magazine sales are declining. Your industry is, in some sense, dying off. And content on the web is free.
Right.
You don't know how to monetize it properly.
Well, I don't know that anyone knows how to monetize it.
And so you're wondering
might not
if
be
these
monetizable.
new devices offer a way, a new business model for you to charge because you've seen the success of people charging for applications.
Music, right.
Yeah, well, whether it's music or whether it's an iPhone application or a game or something like that. And I would propose that the real question is, cannot an application like a Mint, where there are really only maybe, say, 4 or 5 different personal finance applications out there, it's easier to charge for that than content which is somewhat more ubiquitous and, you could say anyone can write it. So the real
that's
question,
true.
yeah.
I think you can, and I think that and I absolutely agree with a lot of what you said. And in fact, that is what's driving my desire to kind of move into this world. But I also believe that it's increasingly clear that we don't live by blog alone. That the blog is a wonderful innovation that took place in an interesting ecosystem where you have to monetize eyeballs. There's absolutely no evidence that suggests, by the way, that online advertising is working, that people are aware of advertising other than directed search, which seems to be a pretty good model. Google owns that. 60% of all advertising revenue goes to them. So it's either going to be something that will be provided by amateurs and some professionals, which I don't believe that's enough. I think people still want deep reading experiences. Or it has to move off of the web, or rather out of the browser and into a format that is more
So
susceptible
that you can
to
charge
it.
for it primarily.
So we can charge for it primarily.
Okay, just wanted to be clear.
Yeah. Well, we can charge for it because the only reason we can charge for it is because there ought to be, I assume, demand for it. I mean, there is demand for movies. We heard yesterday that movies people are paying $5 an hour for by that one metric. People are paying in one way or another for everything. The question is whether they'll pay for deeper reading experiences.
Yeah, so you can put it on an e-reader, or you can put it on an iPhone, and I suppose you could charge for those applications, but someone's just going to develop a reader that can aggregate all the tons of free content that's online and displace you anyway.
True, but in that kind of crawl, walk, run model that Kevin mentioned, it's possible that if you lead consumers back to an experience that is valuable to them, where you're providing them information that's worth paying for, that increase in revenue to the flagging old media companies will embolden them to not put so much free stuff on, right? And so then you're going to have this hybrid world where there will be plenty of information that's delivered for free, small bitsy stuff, summaries of the bigger things, and then there are other things that people will deem worth paying for. I mean, that's all we're asking for, I think.
I think it really speaks to the heart of the matter, which is what's the reading experience? I mean, people pay for stuff that they perceive value in. And if you can deliver a rich, paper-like reading experience that's got all the benefits of a connected digital e-device, I think there's an opportunity there for even the publishing business to revive their model, preserve perhaps even the ad revenue model that they've got in place. It's been successful for so many years. But you've got to deliver at the very heart of it a delightful leisure reading experience. It has to be a great experience for the consumer. Otherwise, they'll just read it on a two-inch screen like an iPhone or something.
Right. I mean, do you think that books go away?
No, personally, I think that there's something tactile about that form factor, that you don't have to have any power, any battery, that you can take on the beach, that's durable in a way that electronics aren't.
So you think books on paper will survive? What about ebooks? Do you think that doesn't really catch on, get bigger?
No, I think it will.
And do you think people will get those for free?
I think that a lot of that content will be free. Maybe not the full novels, but the sort of daily or monthly publications, I think would be free.
So somebody who decides to go write, a book about the birth of the atomic bomb, and it takes 4 years of reporting, they do that as a labor of love, sort of as a hobby?
No, I'm saying you can charge for that kind of material.
But not for the kinds of stuff that, say, Fortune magazine does? When it goes out and does a big piece on Mark Andreessen, that should be something that maybe is more done by amateurs or people who are getting monetized at a much lower level.
Yes, actually, I completely agree with that. I think I can get as much information, or this is horrible to say at a Fortune conference, on Wikipedia or blogs as I can from a Fortune piece. Now, when we're talking about a full novel or something that's been researched, like you said, for 4 years, that's a completely different story.
I think if you look at I think the experience and the convenience of getting this information in a high quality way is really important. So it's not about each individual article, it's about the collection of articles and the editorial decisions about what things to feature and deliver to me, because my time's important and I'd rather have somebody who's really good at doing that help me understand what's going on. And if you look at the quality of reporting that's happening with photography and background and all the depth of the stories in some of these outlets, I think that there's this bridge we have to make between what is seen as now delivering that content as free on the internet, which a lot of these publications are now delivering stuff that appears to be free on the internet. And so we've kind of lost that connection to paying for the value that organization is actually putting effort into. And I think part of that is this perception of, it's a little philosophical, but of the web being a bunch of different places, and places are kind of free, like it's a public space that I can walk around in on the web. I don't want to have a toll booth stopping me from getting to different locations, but people do pay for objects. People collect things, they like to have the sense of ownership of something, and I think that's why you see the willingness to buy things like little applications, because they're like objects that I've bought and I have on my device or on my computer. And so I think if we can make that bridge from the public free space feeling that is on the web today to the, I've bought an object that is of value to me and it's kind of mine, even though it's live and it's getting more data and it keeps morphing itself, but it's the thing that I bought. I think that's a potential bridge here that could associate revenue again with this content, but it's not about each article or anything like that. It's about the experience and the collection.
The aggregation.
Exactly.
Cutting any mustard with you, Aaron?
No, I mean, I understand the argument about, well, we can package it up and it saves me time, but quite frankly, I can decide what's most relevant for me more than you guys can, because you're producing something for a mass audience, whereas I can just go off and research.
And cherry pick.
Exactly.
That's a legitimate point. I don't believe it.
Although I think you'll see publishing models emerge where you're doing news on demand, news served up according to profiles. I think you'll see all kinds of kind of outside the box delivery of content that we can't even envision yet. Once you get to kind of a 3G connected world where you've got devices that can handle the content and preserve the richness of the content, why deliver a paper that's a mass market device when you could deliver a targeted rifle shot to individuals based on a profile that would deliver exactly what they're looking for?
Sort of the Daily Me, that was the dream of, I think, the mid-90s, was this notion of a customizable information feed.
Why not?
And I guess you would say the reason why not is because you're much better at cherry picking what you want at the moment.
That's right.
Remember, it's only spam if you don't like it. If it's something you're interested in, it's useful, wonderful information. So, if you can get good at it and serve up the right information, then it's a great experience for the user.
And you're seeing, Aaron, on your side that the use of apps kind of went up to a point, peaked, and then hasn't gone any further?
Well, for the iPhone, that's because, I think 45% of our users, Mint users, have iPhones. So the biggest ramp that we saw was them taking up that new platform. And then after that, the slower ramp is that's because new users take it up. 40% of new users take it up. That's all.
I see. So it just sort of hit its median point and then kind of floats.
Exactly.
Are you looking at creating other products there?
Yeah, so for the iPhone, one of the things that we may do is in the next version that comes out in a few weeks, you'll be able to enter transactions on the iPhone. And eventually you'll be able to take like a picture of receipts or something like that, and we'll have an application to file expense reports for all sorts of business people. That's been a big pain point. And we have all your credit card, debit card records, and if you can get the receipts in there, then you can file off expense report. It's a feature that people will probably pay for.
And so you would sell it as an application?
Yes.
I think one of the challenges that's emerging now as people make these applications beyond the browser is that you have to build them in lots of different ways if you want to reach different devices. Like you have to make a specific iPhone app. And so for Mint to invest in making 5 of those, that may not make that much sense. And so can we really solve that problem and have a cross-OS app runtime, kind of like we have cross-OS web viewing today? And I think that's a problem that's very much needs to be solved. And we're trying to do that with AIR across PCs and we're bringing it to devices too. But if we're successful at that, then I think that brings the ability for Mint to have that app run on whatever device you have and whatever screen. And I think we're entering a world where the number of screens in our lives is increasing. Whether it's a flexible screen you're carrying around, or a little screen in your pocket, or screens around you as you're going into hotel rooms. There's a screen in my hotel room that doesn't know who I am. It doesn't have my info on it. I can't check my Mint balance on it. Why doesn't that stuff come with me?
And I think love that's that intermediary, because we get requests every day for building a BlackBerry application, and Microsoft has approached us about building something for Windows Mobile and for Android. And BlackBerry, about 19% of our users use that device. And I think Windows Mobile is about 7%, and then Android, it's smaller than that, but it's growing. Yep. And we sort of have a general rule at Mint that we won't build anything unless 20% of our users will use it. But we would relax that rule if we could build it once and then deploy it across all the platforms.
Right. And so right now you're on Linux, Mac, and PC, and you expect to be on various smartphone platforms.
Right.
And these would be Atom chipsets, Atom processors.
Or ARM, yeah.
Or ARM.
Yep.
And ARM by when?
Well, we're working on ARM right now. So in the early, the end of this year, we're going to have public beta of Flash Player running on ARM for smartphones. And then we'll be having devices coming out, production devices, in the first quarter of next year that are both ARM devices and Intel devices.
To what extent do you think, and this is, here's a question by Rebecca Brunkel. I hope I pronounced your last name right. And maybe if I don't get this right, you can elaborate on it wherever you are. You want to put your hand up and we could get somebody over back in the corner back there. Rebecca says, to what point does Apple's App Store need to open in order to maintain its lead? And how does software and technology force the issue? Now, Apple is the predominant thing out there, so I'm not exactly sure what you mean. How much does it need to open up?
Well, what I'm trying to get at, and you were touching on it a little bit as it relates to AIR and really doing a cross-platform type of experience. But if you go back to what Apple just did with the Palm Pre and not allowing Palm Pre to connect into iTunes seamlessly, and it's just as you evolve that and you take lessons from the past and out of history, it would suggest that at some point it makes sense for that standard, which exists today, to open up and able to maintain its leadership, or another open standard that really works across platforms will emerge and ultimately take that lead. And I would just be curious if you agree with that or if you disagree with that. And
Right.
if you agree, at what point do we see that inflection point?
So this is a really relevant question because you would love to be, I'm sure, on the iPhone, and Apple would love for you not to be on the iPhone because if Air were there, you could kind of circumvent their whole app store and point people to another one.
Yeah, well, I think the game is afoot on these devices right now, and Apple has a great early presence, but there are a lot of different devices that are coming out over the next year or two from a variety of different operating system vendors, and the amount of innovation that's happening now is really dramatic in that space. And I think that the market dynamics are going to be changing a lot as all these devices come out. It's not going to be as much the same situation as it is today. So, and I think that's going to put more pressure on the app stores that aren't open, because many of these app stores are going to be open, and therefore the amount of innovation, the speed of innovation there is going to be faster, and that should put pressure on environments that aren't open.
You have a thought on that?
I'd certainly like to see open standards so that you could have things like AIR and that intermediary where we can develop once and move across all the platforms. As far as Apple is concerned, I think that I don't mind the fact that they're a closed environment from the App Store. I think they do a pretty good job of grooming it and highlighting the best applications. Now, saying that is somewhat self-serving because Apple's given us a ton of free advertising. We're on like the back of the New York Times all the time with our little icon.
Right.
But if you don't have that kind of grooming, you end up with something like iGoogle, which has 200,000 applications, and it's impossible to find anything, and there's just a lot of garbage in there.
Right.
So I actually think that there should be a filtering process.
Right, which is a very interesting point. I mean, as we get to 100,000 apps by the end of the year, are they going to have to flatten out their sort of hierarchy so that you'll be able to bring the good stuff to the front, or will some kind of new media emerge that helps separate good apps from bad apps?
It's the long tail of applications. I mean, just like websites. I think there'll be special interest applications that have small communities. Some applications are going to reach millions of people or 100 million people. Same kind of dynamic, I think, will be in play.
Do you think we're going to get to a point where we reach where more people are using apps than using the browser?
That's hard to say, but I think so, yes. I think that...
And by that, let me qualify that by saying, when I spend more time using apps on my iPhone than I do using the Safari browser or Google's browser on the iPhone.
I think the application experience represents the information that you have the most affinity with and you want to have the most efficient experience with. So you don't have to re-download that application experience. You know, when you go to a web page, you're getting not only the content, you're getting all the framework and the code and the application around that content. And that is just less efficient. And that's probably why you like launching the application.
Right.
Is it's faster and you just get the little bit of information.
Right.
And I think your daily experience of interacting with those high-value sites represented as apps is going to be more efficient, and they're going to win out in terms of your time usage.
And so it's going to be the kind of thing where, like they used to say in the mid-1990s, if your company doesn't have a website, you're toast. Now, if your company doesn't have a number of apps, you're toast.
Although, Josh, I would point out that a lot of times the web browsers really look and function more and more like an application, especially when you strip it down. On our purpose-built device, connected device, we have a WebKit browser that is very much customized to access e-commerce locations, e-commerce stores, and buy content and buy all kinds of things. It feels to the user an awful lot like an application. It looks like an application. It feels like an application. It's running a WebKit browser inside that application, but it's really kind of a stylized, specialized use of the browser. On the other hand, we've got native applications that run on our device that will have a document shell with a bunch of rendering engines inside of it, and the rendering engines actually, in the barest kind of basest form of it, are really browser-based themselves. I mean, browsers render, rendering engines render, all these things kind of blur together. So when you say we're going to blow up the browser, yeah, maybe the way we perceive it today, but there are a ton of applications and a ton of uses for browser-based technology that kind of blend in and blur together with that with the native applications that you're talking about for like the iPhone store.
Right, but your browser on your device, I mean, one of the things that makes a browser useful is a keyboard. It's a very interactive experience. I mean, when you're sitting at a computer.
Well, in the classic surf the web mode, yes, of course, you've got to have this interaction.
Well, for Aaron to be cherry picking here and putting us out of business, he needs a keyboard, right?
There you go.
I mean, and I also think that these devices will probably evolve to a certain point where you'll carry this thing around. When you get to work, you'll stick it into a slot, and there will be some kind of a keyboard there.
Apple would certainly like you to think so.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. We do need keyboards from time to time. Even great voice recognition probably isn't enough to get us around, you know, for moments on the train and so forth.
Sure, or you pop a virtual keyboard a la the iPhone, you know, where you can do some sort of on-screen keyboard application.
Right, but back to this idea of having a browser on the device, you know, some people I talk to this about, like Andreessen says, all right, you might go through this little period here where we're walking around with these screens that have little touch keyboards, but ultimately these things are going to become full-blown web browser tablets anyway. You know, Mike Arrington, I don't know if he's here, he's got the Crunch Pad, and you know, I assume the Crunch Pad is going to be basically that. It's just a web browser, and so then the question is, aren't we kind of back to where we were with just a different form factor?
Browsing's great. You know, I think though, even in those situations, you want to try to capture the data that you're working with in a really convenient way. And each device, I think, is going to have its own user interface approach. We're starting to see that creativity happen, you know, with Android, its user interface, with netbooks that are running Linux OSs now that have custom shells on them. They're all exposing this kind of access to applications and the browsing experience in really innovative and novel ways right now. So I think we're in a time of great change and a time of real creativity on that. So, you know, how it shakes out is it's early.
Of course, you're agnostic across any device, but one of the questions we wrestle with all the time as a device manufacturer, people say, well, why should I buy a purpose-built device to read books on? I can read books on my iPhone. And my response is always the same. When was the last time you read a whole novel on your iPhone? And with very few exceptions, the answer is usually never. I have run across a couple that have, but it takes a lot of perseverance to flip through that many little pages.
But I definitely
so then you say, okay, is there a space for a purpose-built device that does a thing really, really good? And I think, you know, Amazon Kindle has kind of wrestled with that issue. We're certainly in that space looking at that. And then how do you connect that and bring in all these different applications to take advantage of that? That's our question that we're trying to wrestle with.
Right, it's a good question. Here's a question from somebody named Scott Conley. And Scott, you're going to have to explain this. Where's Scott? Scott, there's Scott over there. If we could get a mic over there. The question is, well, you know what? Why don't you just ask it?
So I sent it a few seconds ago. Let me look. Can you read?
Sure, I'll refresh your memory.
What was the question?
Isn't browser technology insufficient to deliver the loosely coupled but high collaboration application sandbox that today's users demand? Portlets are fail, no?
Well, that's the question.
You remember writing that?
Yeah, I do. It was
right.
a little bit ago. Yeah, that is the question. To me, blowing up the browser is about, its inability, and I think that's why I bring up portlets. Portlets have long been the industry's attempt to deliver this cross-functional interest, object-based interest inside the browser in order to deliver this functional interest assembled by the user. And it's been a disaster after a disaster, frankly.
You're talking about portals are a disaster.
Yes, as a pattern in the browser. And yet here we have the mobile OSs and what they're doing with Chrome, I think, put us in a position to deliver that experience, but it is a separate OS. And so that's, I want you to respond to that notion as a driving force to applications away from the browser.
That's a good question. I agree with you about portals not having really worked out that well. What I'm seeing right now is people inside enterprises building standalone applications that reach into multiple back-end systems and service that in a unified way. That's kind of the trend that I'm seeing right now, and not portals, but really standalone apps, and built with, like on AIR, for example, or other technologies. And that's where I think the action is at right now, where it may be difficult from a client inside the browser to reach out to multiple systems because of the way sandboxing works. With a desktop or native application or an AIR application, you can unify those systems in a really elegant user interface. So if you're doing a call center application, for example, you can pull from multiple backends and represent that in that UI. That's what I'm seeing happen. I think there's really exciting applications in the financial services industry. That's really taking off right now with people creating really rich, interactive applications to look at what's happening during the trading day. NASDAQ has done one, and a bunch of others have done them now.
Yeah. Are you indicating there's another question over there? Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Just a question about AIR. What are the advantages for the adoption of AIR versus the Java platform, which is a write once, run anywhere platform that can also do applets that are, of course, browserless. So I'm just wondering why we need another platform at this point.
Sure, I can answer that.
Yeah, I guess that would be the
That would be you, Kevin.
Okay.
I want to hear Aaron on that, actually.
So yeah, if you look at what Java attempted to achieve with running applications consistently on client computers, it didn't really work out for them in terms of actually working consistently. You ended up having to write your Java application multiple times because the runtimes were all different. Instead of run once, write once, run everywhere, it was write once, debug everywhere, and so that was not a productive experience. With AIR, we actually have made it run the same across all operating systems, and so technically that's the biggest difference that I see there.
I figure now that Larry Ellison owns it, he's going to straighten that out, right?
Yeah, well, I guess we'll see how that works out. Yeah.
Here's another question from John McKinley, and this is also pointed at you, Kevin. Did the Palm Pre get it right with CSS, JavaScript, and HTML versus another vendor-specific approach?
Well, I think it's early for Palm Pre. I like that they're betting on web applications as their way of doing standalone apps, because I think that's definitely where it's at. And our approach at Adobe is to work to push that innovation forward on the web so that it's not stuck in current technology with HTML. And we're participating in HTML5 to help move that forward now. But we're also participating in terms of what Flash can add to the web experience, as we've been doing for the past 10 years. So, enabling things like video to work reliably across operating systems, enabling you to do vector graphics reliably. Those kinds of technologies we add in where HTML hasn't gone that far yet, and we'll continue doing that. So I like their approach, but I think in terms of the most expressive applications, a combination of HTML and Flash is really the best way to go, and that's what we're doing with the AIR runtime.
Great. Other questions? We have time for maybe one more question. Going once, going twice. Oh, there's one. There we go.
Hi, I'm sorry I got on a little late, so maybe this was already discussed, but with Adobe AIR, what made you decide that we need to do a new platform? I mean, all of a sudden it showed up. It's worked pretty well, I think, for myself as a consumer. But what was the logic that said, we need to control a platform and here's why we're going to do it?
Sure. Well, the logic wasn't about that control. It was about looking at how can we help move web applications forward on the internet, because we had gotten to a certain point with a web browser, and the technologies have not been moving very quickly, at least the past few years. Now there's some more innovation that's starting. And so we at Adobe were looking at that problem and said, okay, well, we want to help move that environment forward for web applications to make them even more powerful than they are today. We could do that by trying to make a browser, but then we looked at, okay, what kind of reach can we get with a browser in the browser space, and can we get 80, 90% reach so that we can actually have an effect on the web and have people rely on it. We didn't feel like we would be able to get that much reach with a browser, especially given that browsers are bundled with operating systems like Windows, so turning that around is really hard. So it's very brave of Google to be going after that with Chrome, and I wish them the best on that. And Firefox has been going after that. But we thought at Adobe we probably wouldn't be able to get that kind of reach. So with what we decided to do was, hey, let's enable these web applications to get this greater capability without making you switch your browser or having to get in the browser war. And so AIR runs alongside whatever browser you have. You can keep using the browser you've got, but you can install TweetDeck and run TweetDeck, and it runs great. And you haven't had to switch your browser, and so we're able to move that innovation forward more quickly in a way that's complementary to the browser rather than having to kind of defeat whatever browser you have. So it's kind of a peaceful approach to web innovation, if you will.
Great. Kevin, thank you. Thank you, Kevin Hamilton, and thank you, Aaron.
Nice
back
being
to
here.
you, Stephanie. Thanks, everybody.